Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning this week a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Ani Hine Brisi Itoch. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parshas Lech Lecha, which was the 8th day of the month of Marcheshvan, in the year Tafshin Mem Daled 38 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in this week's Torah portion where it says, Ani hine brisi itoch v'yisa la'av hamoim goyim. Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations. So the Rebbe says it's known, the question that the Alter Rebbe asks on this Chassidic discourse, when he said it in the year Tuf Kuf Samach Beis, exactly 220 years ago. And also Rebbe says it's actually expressed in a different, almost a little different version, in the book of Eira Torah of the Tzemach Tzedek, that over there the Tzemach Tzedek writes that the Alter Rebbe heard it from his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich. And the question he asks is, what's the connection between the idea that when Avraham Avinu gets circumcised, that's when he becomes the father of the multitude of nations? Until his circumcision, he was not the father of the multitude of nations. Once he became circumcised, what happened in circumcision that thing shifted? So the Rebbe brings from the Alter Rebbe that explains as follows: that we know that Avraham Avinu represented the idea of chesed. In other words, even though Avraham Avinu has all the spheres, as everybody has all the spheres, but his predominant force, what he was known for, what he excelled in, was in developing the midah of chesed. Avraham represented kindness. And like we know, the famous the story that's brought down in Rashi and Chumash on the Torah, that Avraham Avinu was in pain because he couldn't do chesed. Why? Because chesed wants to do chesed. Chesed needs to do chesed. And if you take away the opportunity from someone that's a Isha chesed, do chesed, it's very, very painful. That's on a simple level. Also, according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, we know that Avraham Avinu personified the midah, the attribute of chesed. And like it's brought down in the Medrash, it says that the Avos are the Merkava. They're the chariot for Hashem. Which means practically, Avraham Avinu was the chariot of the midah of chesed. He's the one that brought chesed into the world. And like the Rebbe brings in the Sefer HaBoyer, that says as follows, that midas chesed, the attribute of chesed, tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tells Hashem, from the days that Avraham Avinu came down to this earth, I didn't have to do my work. Why? Why didn't I have to do chesed? Because Avraham is doing it. He's standing and he's serving the people and the world with chesed. In other words, so Avraham Avinu's chesed didn't start with circumcision. He was always chesed. He was always taking care of the whole world. So if that's the case, it comes back to the question, since Avraham Avinu's chesed, he was always chesed, and he was giving chesed to the whole world. So what happened over here at circumcision that all of a sudden now he becomes the father of the multitude of nations? He always cared about everybody. Not only that, when Avraham Avinu gave out chesed, it wasn't that he only gave out chesed. He was drawing down, it wasn't his own chesed. He was drawing down in this world chesed from on high. He was bringing down powerful energy of chesed into this world from a very, very high place. So since Avraham was doing chesed, not just feeding people, but he's bringing down chesed, kindness, through the light and the energy into this world from very, very high places. So therefore he was able to draw in souls, very, very high souls, even for the nations of the world. Because he was drawing down from high places, high souls, down to this world, to everybody. Even the nations of the world had high souls, thanks to Avraham Avinu distributing chesed to the world. Now, how does chesed work? So we know that even though chesed is one of the sfirot, the way the sfirot work is, you have the 3 intellectual sfirot, you have the 6 emotional sfirot, and the 6th of the last of the emotional sfirot is called Yesod. Yesod is what connects yourself to the next generation, which is Malchus. So Yesod is the last driving force that drives all the spheros. So even though Avraham Avinu was chesed, that's who he was, but how did chesed go out to the world? Through the midah of Yesod. Now, Avraham Avinu at that point was not circumcised. So when he wasn't circumcised, chesed was going through Yesod, which is the place of the circumcision, and before he was circumcised, the foreskin was there as well. So because the foreskin was there, so chesed was going through Yesod, but it was also going into the foreskin, and therefore chesed was able to bring down high souls into the nations of the world as well. And the Rebbe gives, for example, an example of this, that we find that Avraham Avinu was able to bring down holy, very, very high, powerful souls into this world through the Yesod that went through the foreskin before it was cut off. And they give an example that there was high, holy souls and those extreme souls. The Rebbe uses the expression extreme, tzaddikim meflagim, extreme souls, even in the nations of the world. So he gives an example. One example, we find that who existed in that time, a holy soul for the nations of the world. We find Mr. Shalach. We learned about it in last week's Torah portion, Parashas Noach. And specifically, when it comes to this highly high soul, this highly extreme tzaddik as Mr. Shalach, this is an extreme example. The Rebbe says why. Because besides the fact that we know Mr. Shalach lived for how many years? He lived for a long time. He lived for 969 years. Almost 1,000 years he lived. What does that mean? How did he live so long? Because that's chesed. Chesed means he was given energy, he was given life, and he lived a long life. Not only did he physically live a long life, but the impact that Mr. Shalach had wasn't only on himself that he was a tzaddik, but he actually impacted a generation. And we're not just talking about a random generation. Mr. Shalach had a tremendous impact on the generation of the flood, the Dor HaMabul, which we know the Dor HaMabul were wicked people. And as we learned last week in the Torah portion, that when Hashem was going to bring the flood, so Hashem said he waited to bring the flood after Mr. Shalach died for 7 days. Not while Mr. Shalach was alive. For sure, while he was alive, he waited to give Mr. Shalach a chance to inspire people to do tshuva. But even after he passed away, respect to Mr. Shalach, for the 7 days that people were mourning him, the flood didn't start yet. In other words, not only while he was alive was he able to hold back for the flood from coming, because he was a tzaddik interceding on behalf of the people, let me try to inspire them to do tshuva. But even after he passed away, the flood did not start for 7 days, out of respect to this highly powerful tzaddik as Mr. Shalach. Even though the fact is, we know the Torah says clearly, Hashem says, Kimalla ha'aretz chamas. The earth was corrupt. And if it was corrupt, it had to be destroyed, and the flood had to start. But in the sake and the merit of Mr. Shalach, such a high tzaddik, the flood did not start yet. As a matter of fact, we know that the generation of the flood, the Rebbe says, was worse than the generation of the dispersion. There are flood later on at the end of last week's Torah portion, Parashas Noach. And as Rashi explains, that the generation of the flood, because they weren't getting along, Hashem decided He's going to wipe them out. However, the generation of the dispersion, that they were rebelling against Hashem because they got along, He wasn't going to wipe them out. But Mr. Shalach lived when? In the Dor HaMabul. And even though it was such a corrupt generation, and again, worse than the Dor HaFlaga, nevertheless, Hashem waited for the tzaddik, even after he passed away, for the 7 days. So you see how powerful, what kind of great tzaddik came to the world, thanks to Avraham Avinu. Now, the fact is, the Rebbe goes a step further. When Hashem stopped the flood, it wasn't just He stopped the flood in this world, it didn't rain. We know when it rained in this world, it rained in all the worlds, in all the levels of the worlds, starting from all the way on high. And the flood waited on all levels. It wasn't just that it came down and just didn't come down to this world. On all the levels it didn't rain. So you see again how powerful Mr. Shalach was. Now, not only that, take it a step further. As long as it didn't rain, and it was while he was alive, and even after he passed away, so who knows what happened if everyone did tshuva, people repented, Hashem wouldn't have brought the flood, but there was ready rain in store. So it would have turned into, from being a mabul, a flood, it would have been gishmei bracha, it would have been a rain of a blessing, which is the ultimate of blessing. You take something that would have been a flood and it becomes a blessing. So Mr. Shalach was able to withhold the mabul, and it could have actually turned into a tremendous blessing. So what you see from here clearly is that before Avraham Avinu was circumcised, there were holy souls, and those drawing down chesed into this world, very, very high chesed, high chesed into this world, and even in the nations of the world. That was all through Avram Avinu because he wasn't circumcised. So it went through the foreskin, and the whole world was able to benefit from the chesed of Avram. And based on this, Rebbe explains that's why we can understand, specifically after Avram Avinu was circumcised, now he became the father of the multitude of nations. Not before. Why? Because what does it mean, Av Hamoin Goyim, the father of the multitude of nations? What does Av mean? So Av means the father, which means he becomes the ruler over them. The father's the one that's in charge. So up until the circumcision, he did a lot of chesed of Avram Avinu, and he brought down holy souls into the world. But he wasn't the Av, he wasn't the father, he wasn't the ruler of the world. Why is that? Because before the circumcision, so chesed was coming down, and holy souls were coming down to the world, coming down to the nations of the world as well. So therefore, Avram wasn't the ruler over them. They had full access. They had chesed. Chesed there was no filter on the chesed. There was chesed all over the place. In the nations of the world, also true was through Avram Avinu, but they had chesed. How can he rule over them? They had high level mishashalach and so on and so forth. But what happens once Avram Avinu was circumcised? And now the foreskin was taken away. In other words, the Yesod is pure. And there's not going to be any leakage to places where it's not supposed to go. In other words, nations of the world are not going to receive any more chesed through the Yesod, because the Arla, which is the place that it was leaking out to the world, is not there anymore. So there's no way to leak out. So the only place that chesed went is to where it was appropriate to go. So therefore, after the circumcision, now the only way for them to get into chesed is through Avram Avinu. And that's when Avram became a Av Hamoin Goyim, because they all had to get it from him directly, specifically through Yesod. And then Avram Avinu became the Av Hamoin Goyim, the Av, the father, the ruler over the nations of the world. So that's basically the Rebbe brings from the Alter Rebbe, explains why only at circumcision did he become the Av Hamoin Goyim. Just to recap, because up until the circumcision, so Avram was Midas HaChesed and was going through his Yesod, but because there was a foreskin, so he was able to go into the nations of the world, and they had holy people, and therefore he wasn't the ruler. They had plenty of other rulers in the world. However, once he was circumcised, so now the foreskin went off, so therefore the energy of chesed went into directed and appropriate places. They had no source. They weren't able to leach out of chesed. So now they came to Avram Avinu, and he was the leader of all the nations in the world. The Rebbe now brings another insight, another interpretation of what it says, Av Hamoin Goyim. We say Av, he was the father of the multitude of nations. So the first we learned, he was the father he was the ruler of all the nations of the world. The Rebbe brings now another insight. Av Hamoin Goyim is referring to that he was the father of Goyim Gerim, converts, people that converted and became Jewish. Now, how does someone convert? How does a male convert? A male converts through circumcision. So you see again, what was the question? What's the connection between that he became the father of Hamoin Goyim? Now we're translating as he became the father of the converts. So he became the father of converts, and it happens through circumcision. That's one of the ways of becoming a convert, at least for a male. Now, that's on a simple level. Now I was going to explain it Kabbalistically, and it's really, really beautiful and powerful. And he says like this. He explains over there in the Chassidic Discourse that before Avram Avinu circumcised, so what happened? There were holy souls that were coming down even to the nations of the world, because you had the foreskin that was allowing it to leach out to the nations of the world. Now, so because they were receiving the energy through Avram Avinu Yesod through the foreskin, so there was no reason to convert to Judaism. Why? Because in the nations of the world, they also had holy people. They were very, very holy souls. So what's the attraction to convert to becoming a Jew? They had powerful energies. True was coming through Avram Avinu, but they had it. They had holy people there, holy souls. However, after Avram Avinu circumcised, now they're lacking that source of very, very high souls, because now it was cut off once the circumcision took place. So now they were looking for something holy, something godly. They didn't have it. They didn't have holy souls anymore. So therefore they came to Avram Avinu to convert. Why? Because they wanted to have that godliness, and they weren't able to get it once Avram was circumcised. And based on this, the Rebbe explains what's why it says in the Chassidic Discourse, that's why, for example, when you look at converts that come to Judaism, so they don't come from Ishmaelites. Why is that? Because when was Yishmael born? Yishmael was actually born before the circumcision. Yishmael was born before the circumcision. Now, therefore, so they also have holy souls. But since he was born before the circumcision, so where did Yishmael get the energy from? He got it through the foreskin. And through Yishmael, there is some holy energies in the nations of Yishmael. And that's why it says Avram, Yatzam Mena Yishmael. Yishmael came from Avram Avinu, from the original part before the circumcision. And therefore there's no reason for them to convert. You don't find a lot of conversions by them. Why? Because he was born before the circumcision. Powerful idea. By Yishmael, there is holy energy that came through the foreskin, and therefore they have holy souls, and therefore we don't find converts from there. However, when it comes to Esav already comes after the circumcision, so there's much more converts that come through Esav. Why? Because holy souls they don't have anymore, but they're attracted to the holiness, and therefore they convert. Esav was born after the circumcision. So even though there's no holy souls, because it's already after the circumcision, but nevertheless they convert because they were born afterwards. And they want to attract to the holy energy, and based on this, Rebbe explains that's why it says in the Torah, because Rabbi Yitzchok told Avram Avinu, Rabbi Yitzchok Yikari Lechazara, and it doesn't say Yitzchok only Yitzchok, Rabbi Yitzchok. In Yitzchak means it'll be Yitzchak, will be your offspring. But Bi Yitzchak means referring to there's other offsprings. What is that? Not necessarily Esav per se, but all the converts through Esav. Why? Because you have Yitzchak, who's Abraham's son, and then you have the converts of Esav that also part of Avraham Avinu's offspring. Abraham was the father of the converts. Now, so based on this, the Rebbe explains something very, very powerful and very problematic. And he says like follows. We know there's a Kabbalistic truth that anytime there's a Yerida, anytime there's a descent, anytime there's a downgrade in somebody's life, anytime you're going through a challenge, so you can look at it, oh my gosh, I'm going through something terrible. Kabbalah teaches us that literally every descent, every challenge, every problem, every struggle, it's only a stepping stool for a great elevation. So when you're going through a challenge, you can smile. Because even though right now it's a challenge, but guess what? There's a tremendous elevation coming. You're going through a struggle? Yeah, it's a struggle, agreed. And it's painful, possibly. But guess what? From the struggle is going to come a tremendous elevation. And that's a truism in the world of Kabbalah, and it's a true in reality. After every challenge, every struggle, something great happens. So based on this, Rebbe asks a simple question. We know that in Matan Torah, when we receive the Torah from Hashem, what do we say? Hashem chose the Jewish people out of the nations of the world. And He elevated us from all the different languages. So what does that mean? We were chosen. We were elevated. If we were chosen and elevated, what happens to all the other nations of the world that were not chosen and weren't elevated? They have a Yerida. They were downgraded by default. Now, so if they were downgraded, where's their tremendous elevation? If by us being elevated, they were downgraded, and with the rule is that when you have a downgrade, there's an elevation. So where's the elevation of the nations of the world? So Rebbe says, based on what we just learned, we can explain it beautifully and very simply. And he says like this. What happened before Matan Torah? Before we were chosen? Before we were chosen, before Matan Torah, how did the world exist? So we know the famous Talmud that says that when we say in Psalms, Psalm 136, Hoidul Hashem kitoi kilal mchaste, so it lists 26 things that we're grateful to Hashem for His tremendous chesed. So the question is, what's the 26? Why 26? So it's referring to the 26 generations until Matan Torah. The 26 generations from when Hashem created the world until Matan Torah. So those generations, how did the world exist? We know that when we learn Torah, that gives life force and energy to the world. Before we receive the Torah, so what's giving life force to the world? What's giving life force to the world before Matan Torah is chesed of Hashem. So in other words, before Matan Torah, the world operated on Chesed Shalamayla, kindness from Hashem Himself. Who received that kindness? Everybody. Jew and non-Jew. All the nations of the world received that kindness. And like the Rebbe says, it's explained in the Talmud I mentioned, there's 26 generations. How did they receive energies from the kindness of Hashem? Now, the kindness of Hashem is referring to not only specifically the Midah of Chesed, but it's actually all 6 emotional Sfirot. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, all 7 Sfiros. And what level we know in the spheres, the highest Sfira is Keser. In Keser, there's 2 levels. Atik is the higher one, Arach is the lower one. So the Chesed that was existing and that was available to everybody, the Jewish people and the nations of the world up until Matan Torah, comes from Chesed Hashem, either of Atik, which is the higher level of Keser, or Arach, the lower level of Keser. Now, so since what happened was Chesed was strong, so up until Matan Torah, conversion wasn't a real thing. Because even the converts that converted in the times of Abraham, they didn't stay converts. Why? Because they had Chesed of Hashem. Why did they have to convert to Judaism? Everybody was getting from the Chesed of Hashem. So in other words, there was no Yerid over there. And therefore there was no reason to have an Aliyah to convert to Judaism. But however, what happened by Matan Torah? Hashem chose the Jewish people. And He elevated us. So now they had a downgrade, because now we became high and they became lower. Then what happened was they needed Aliyah. Where's the Aliyah? And the Rebbe says the Aliyah is the fact that they converted. When they converted, they were able to reach a much higher level. Because through the conversion, that's the ultimate in elevation. Because they're reaching a much higher level than before. And the Rebbe brings practical examples as we see. That the converts to Judaism, for example, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva, and it's brought down in many places in Chassidus, the real quality, the super quality, the godly quality that Rabbi Meir had, and the godly quality that Rabbi Akiva had. And both of them we know were converts. And specifically through those 2 converts, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva, we had tremendous, powerful insights and revelations in the world of Torah. From who? From the converts. Again, to recap, the Rebbe says, what's the elevation? Yeah, Ata B'chatanu. So there was a downgrade. And up until Matan Torah, they didn't have to convert. Why? Because they were getting from the Chesed of Hashem. But once they realized Ata B'chatanu, so they realized, oh my gosh, we have a downgrade. So they came for the light. They came to be elevated, and they became converts. And the converts became very, very powerful in the world of Judaism. Like for example, Meir and Akiva, like he mentions over here, and like the Rebbe quotes from the Talmud, the famous incident in the Talmud. They were looking at all these different quotes and sayings that didn't have a name associated to it. So they were associating, oh, this must be from this rabbi, this must be from that rabbi, based on the other teachings. But the Talmud says, all of them, all these teachings are associated, this rabbi, that rabbi, the other rabbi, they all go according to Rebbe Akiva. Why does it go according to Rebbe Akiva? Because they were all students of Rebbe Akiva. Think about that. Every one of these leading rabbis were all students of Rebbe Akiva, who Rebbe Akiva himself was the convert. So the convert was able to produce students, leading students in Judaism that all were taught by Rebbe Akiva the convert. That's in reference to Rebbe Akiva. The same thing also when it comes to Rabbi Meir. We know what it tells us in Chazal, that why was he called Meir? Why was he called light? Because he would basically open up the eyes of all the scholars in halacha. He showed them revelations and understandings and depth that they weren't able to see. Up until the point that it says that the Chachamim, the greatest sages, were not able to comprehend the depth of Rabbi Meir. In other words, the Talmud says, very fascinating, that Rabbi Meir can take something which is impure, and he give you the best logic why it's pure, or something which is pure and give you the best logic why it's impure. And they didn't know when what he was teaching them, is this correct or not correct, because his brilliance was so brilliant in Torah. As a matter of fact, That's one of the reasons why, when there's an argument between Rabbi Meir and Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda, you're able to understand, and you knew what the halacha was. Rabbi Meir, you weren't sure if he was just giving you like an intellectual, brilliant exercise that wasn't necessarily held out according to Jewish law or not. But you see how powerful Rabbi Meir was, and Rabbi Kiva as well. And the Rebbe brings also from the Yerushalmi that says as follows: that Rabbi Kiva put Rabbi Meir in front of the Rashbi, even though he said that by reference to Rashbi, that it's enough that me and you understand, me and Hashem understand how powerful you are. But nevertheless, he put Rabbi Meir first. So you see that the converts that converted to Judaism, the aliyah that they had, and the aliyah that Klal Yisrael had through them is unbelievable. And we all know today, and not to digress, converts to Judaism are very, very powerful and much more holy than some of the holiest Jews. Why? Because that's the power of conversion. They came from a lower place. They realized, oh my gosh, they were not chosen. And they wanted to have that. So they embraced it, and they embraced it even deeper and even stronger. So based on this, the Rebbe finished off and he says, that's why it says, Ani hine brisi itach vayisol av hamon goyim. That in other words, after the circumcision, Hashem says, this is my bond to you. And now you're going to become the father for the multitude of nations. Again, the first insight was the father of all the nations, because they didn't have any more the source of light because of the circumcision. And the second one, that Avraham Avinu became the father of all the converts. In other words, by taking off the foreskin from the circumcision, so Avram became the Av HaMoin Goyim, he became the father and the ruler of all the nations. And up until the point, it became in a real way, in a revealed way. And as we know, it says in the Torah, what did the people tell Avraham Avinu when he came to buy the place to bury his wife, Sarai Menu? They said, Nasi Elikim Ata B'Seichenu. They called him a prince. Simple people. They called him a Nasi, and a godly prince. Why? Because they realized this is the man of God. And we know Avraham Avinu, he was the beginning of all people that got circumcised. And from there, every single Jew that gets circumcised is connected to Avraham Avinu's circumcision. Even though the Rebbe says, even though it's beforehand, people were circumcised, not that they circumcised, they were born circumcised, but that wasn't that they got circumcised. That wasn't circumcision that they did by themselves, like Avraham Avinu. Why? Because circumcision started with Avraham Avinu, and we have it as an inheritance from Avraham Avinu, and it's going to become revealed. The fact that the Hamoin Goyim, all the nations of the world are going to recognize Avraham as the real leader, is going to happen when Mashiach comes in the future, when everything is going to be revealed. Today, we're living in a world where there's concealment. So not necessarily openly people recognize it, but when Mashiach comes, everything's going to be revealed. And there are quotes from the prophet that says, V'nigla kvoid Hashem, God is going to be revealed. V'ro kol basa yachtav, every single person of flesh and blood is going to recognize all together. And that what are they going to recognize? They're going to see that the Jewish people are the real owners and rulers of the world, and they're the father of the multitude of nations. And as the prophet says clearly, V'hoisol Hashem hamlucha, that God is going to be the king on the world. And that's because before that's going to be fulfilled the verse that says, Oz efoichal amim safar vrura lekroya kul Hashem Hashem, that Hashem is going to cause that all the nations of the world are going to call out clearly and say that Hashem, we want to serve the Avdei Shem Chacham Echad, we're going to serve the one Hashem. And then it's going to be fulfilled the prophet that says, Nachon yiyeh har beis Hashem, Beroi Shaharim, that's what's going to be recognizable as the mountain of Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash, and Beno Elav Kol HaGoyim, all the nations of the world, Avamoin Goyim, all the nations of the world are going to come to serve Hashem. And the same thing also, not only in Yerushalayim or Kodesh by Beis Hamikdash, but the whole Israel. As we know, it says in the Torah, Tamid Einei Hashem Alekechaba, the eyes of Hashem are in the land of Israel, Mireshis Hashana v'ad Achros Hashana, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And when Mashiach comes, the fact is it's there right now, but when Mashiach comes, it's going to be in a revealed way. And what's going to happen then is, first, all the Jewish people are going to come to Eretz Yisrael, and as the verse says, B'nareinu, B'skanenu, V'neinu, V'neseinu, with our youth and with our elders, with our children, with our sons and our daughters. And then what's going to happen is all the nations of the world are going to come and they're going to say, L'chu v'na'aleh al har Hashem. Let's go up to the mountain of Hashem. When is that going to happen? The Rebbe finishes off and he said it's going to happen bigulo hamitis v'ashlema, with the redemption, the true redemption, the complete redemption. And it's going to happen through Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu mamash. It's going to happen very, very soon and very, very quickly. Again, this is a very, very powerful Chassidic discourse, and it teaches us the responsibility we have to be the father of the multitude of nations, to teach the Jewish people, the nations of the world, and together, as the Rebbe said, we'll all merit the ultimate revelation. We're all going to see it with our own eyes. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.